privilege now of introducing our speaker, Bryan Owen, and most of you are well aware of his credentials, and I'm not going to spend talking about that other than just to remind you that he comes to us from Hershey Resorts and Entertainment, is a director of marketing there, engaged in interactive and creative media, and also just talking with him this morning has some other exciting things that he's transitioning into in his organization. I met Bryan probably about 2 years ago. We had breakfast together, and he already had some connections to the college, and it was expressing his interest in being involved. And I have to just give you a little teaser into a story that he told me, and I don't know if he'll want to, he might not share it this morning, but you have to ask him about this story at some point. By the way, Bryan went to University of Virginia and has his undergraduate degree and 2 masters from UVA, and is also quite an athlete, although was not a football player going into UVA, correct? A fascinating story about, and again, just in short, involves Bryan on the UVA football team against the University of Michigan, catching a number of passes against Michigan, University of Michigan. It's one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard. So before there was Jeremy Lin, Bryan is just a tremendous man, has all kinds of talents, and most importantly, a heart for people, a heart for God. And that's one of the reasons we invited him to teach with us this semester. So he's teaching for the first time in an adjunct role at Messiah College Principles of Marketing class. So, Bryan.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. This is a privilege. I assume you guys can hear me. I've been, as Dr. Hageman mentioned, I've been teaching a class at Messiah for the first time, and so I've sort of learned to project and notice when people are falling asleep. So also when preparing this was realizing that, I sort of had this moment last night as I was going to sleep. I was like, do I need to prepare a quiz for tomorrow or what? Like, okay, wait a second, this is a different type of lecture. So yeah, this is a great opportunity. As Dave mentioned, I'm not a graduate of Messiah, but have a ton of connections. I grew up in the area in Mechanicsburg, Camp Hill area. Grew up with Leighton Shoemaker's soccer camps, teaching me how to play soccer, and had lots of friends and friends' parents who worked or taught at Messiah, and lots of folks at church, and then I've had the opportunity to teach. So this is definitely, I have a lot of strong ties to the university, so it's great to be here. So I appreciate the opportunity. I call this a discussion because hopefully that's what it is, and just thinking about. I never really feel all that qualified to talk on anything, but, in particular when we're talking about tablets in the workplace, I don't know if there's anybody who's really an expert in this topic. The iPad was released, the version 1, in April of 2010, so it's about 2 years, and typically, the businesses lag behind consumers. So, I don't know that we can necessarily say that anybody's an expert, but I'm here to sort of share some thoughts and ideas around it. And it's just something that's, for me is really, the device has captivated my imagination since it came out. My wife sort of jokes, and people at work joke, that it's almost like an appendage, because if you see me, this is going to be somewhere with me, partially because I don't trust my memory, so everything someone says to me that I need to remember goes on this thing. So that's part of it. But so yes, my name's Bryan. I do work for Hershey Entertainment Resorts, if you guys are not familiar. Just a little bit about the company and what I do. We have a whole bunch of businesses. We're a regional tourist destination in Hershey. And our biggest revenue driver, our biggest business is Hershey Park. We've got a hotel and a lodge and a campground. We've got all that. We've got a country club, the Hershey Bears. We do a lot of group business, so we'll have events like this and trade shows and conventions and things like that in different venues. Let's see what else. We've got like laundry, nursery services. I think I mentioned the Bears. A whole bunch of different things going on in Hershey, and our unit in marketing, we serve the entire company. So we work across all those different brands, which for us is really interesting because just because of the diversity. I mean, think about the difference between marketing like Hershey Park and the spa, right? That's two different sometimes some people come from the park and go to the spa, but we've got lots of restaurants and things like that. So my responsibility currently is we have a almost like an internal agency. That's sort of what we're comparable to. So we have guys that we're responsible for taking sort of like the campaign and marketing strategy and then turning it into to marketing in some level. So we have folks that work on TV and radio. We do a lot of print design, so all the billboards, all that kind of stuff, and sort of come up with concepts for the campaigns, which for right now we're working on this coming summer, and then we translate to all these different mediums. And then there's really the interactive side, which we have folks that work in email, and we've got about 30 plus websites that we work with, social media and things like that. So tablets, for us, it's really, there's two sides. There's one which is really understanding how guests and consumers are using it, right, and then how they're looking for information from us, whether they're talking about the hotel or the lodge or the park. And then there's also sort of how we use it sort of in the workplace. And our team it's been great because my background is in sort of in the intersection between IT and marketing, and I worked at web startups in DC for a while and consulting with web startups, and it's always just been part of, especially in DC and in that industry, you just new technology comes, you just start using it, right? You pick it up and you start applying it. It doesn't matter if it's for work or for business, you sort of do it and you sort of expect that. Hershey is a pretty conservative company. We've got a lot of support from IT and other departments, and it's been great because we've been able to sort of partner with some of those teams in terms of getting some of these devices in use in our workplace, in our environment. So that's been really fun to see sort of how that happens. So that's sort of going to be the focus for the talk today. I do have to admit that I am an Apple fanboy. It took me a while to admit this, but if you can read this, it's a great sort of mockery of those of us who are big fans of Apple. But overall defensive demeanor, shaking fist toward the non-believers, an empty wallet, of course, messenger bag full of every portable Apple product on the market. So yeah, about 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to start using a Mac and then started picking up the devices. And when I came to Hershey, it was funny because I didn't really know anybody. They said, "What kind of equipment do you want?" I said, "Well, I'd like a Mac laptop and an iPhone and things like that," just because that's what I was using. I didn't realize that the only other person in the company that had an iPhone was the CEO. And so like here I am, like the guy coming in with this chip on his shoulder requesting an iPhone. I'm like, I didn't know. So that was it's definitely been interesting. But so my talk, we're going to talk today about tablets. And again, if you guys have sort of questions that come up, or if something resonates in particular, or you sort of fundamentally disagree with something I say, please, either raise your hand or just yell it out, because hopefully we can have some discussion around this. But so yeah, I'm not going to be talking about Apple products in general, but some of the examples that I'll show as we get into it later are iPad examples, and it's really the concepts and the principles sort of apply across both. I've used Android devices as well, but my experience has mostly been with Apple. So what I like to do, that's a little bit about me, is when I start discussions like this, is just to get a sense for the audience that I'm talking to, and some of you guys I know, so I sort of know how you fit into these different categories. But especially when it pertains to the adoption of new technology. So if you can put yourself in certain categories, I have a couple pictures here, and this is the interactive component of the discussion. So you're going to be asked to raise your hand here in a minute, so prepare. You can raise either one, but if there's any of these pictures that particularly resonates with you in terms of how you feel about new technology and specifically about sort of iPads and tablets, I'd love you to sort of raise your hand. And we're all friends, we all know each other really well, so it shouldn't be intimidating at all. This is the first one. So I don't know if any of you feel like this, where sort of new technology and tablets and all that is a little bit overwhelming. You're sort of, if you search for pulling your hair out in Flickr, this is the guy that comes up. So this is sort of the feel. I don't know if any of you guys, if it was random with any of you guys, just new technology is always coming. I don't know. I hear all these new terms. It's a little bit overwhelming. I can't get it started. No one will help me figure it out. I talk to my kids. They can't help me figure it out, that kind of stuff. So anyone feel like in that category? Oh, good. All right, we got a couple brave souls. Good. Yeah. All right. What about this one? So, this whole thing's a fad. It's going to go away soon if I just ignore it for a little while. It's going to pass me by. We'll be back to the good old days where we're sitting at desktops or mainframes and working on things for computers. Anybody sort of waiting for this to happen? No? All right. I usually don't get a lot of on set. So then this is the sort of dipping the toe in the water, right? So we sort of get it. I like to sort of feel out a little bit, come to events like this, and get a sense for how it is. Maybe get a tablet and play around with. Anybody in that camp? A lot of people. All right. How many people have iPads or Android tablets or something at home? All right. So there's a pretty good audience. Good. Okay. And then I don't know if there's anyone in this category, the rock star, who sort of lives and breathes it. I know Jason is. All right, he's got one there, so I can tell. You guys are making me a little bit nervous, and you talk about IT, so you guys help me out if I say something wrong. But yeah, I didn't figure there'd be a lot of people that consider themselves in this category. So why am I here? Well, free breakfast, to hang out with people a little bit was part of the draw. Plus, I was asked by Dave and Reed to do it. But really, it's just about my goal here is to really share some of my personal thoughts. As I said, there's not really necessarily an expert, I don't think, that in this topic, but hopefully, really just to stimulate some ideas about how you guys might be able to take it and either use these devices a little bit, or at least consider it, whether it's a good decision or not, to use these devices. So hopefully, it's just to really stimulate conversation, and really. At first, if you remember when the iPad came out in 2010, a lot of the questions were around, how should we think about this device? Is it a laptop, or is it a phone? Because we're so used to sort of thinking like, okay, I have my phone that I carry around with me, and that's what I use to call people and sometimes text. And then I go to my desk and I sit down and I work at the computer. How does this thing fit in? Which one is it, right? And so my personal opinion and what we've seen, at least in sort of usage for Hershey, is that it's sort of its own thing a little bit, right? It's crowding out in some respects, and I think I have a slide next to talk about the research, but really, in a lot of ways, people are using it sort of differently than they've used both of those devices. But if anything, it is crowding out a little bit what we see in terms of the usage to our web properties. People tend to of tablets like they use laptops more than mobile devices, more than like smartphones, just in terms of the information they're looking for and things like that. It's more of a browsing, sort of exploring experience than a purely transactional like on the mobile devices. So this is from Morgan Stanley. They said, tablets should reduce PC market growth by 3 percentage points in 2011. Don't know if that happened or not, but the idea is that we're seeing it sort of creep in on the PC market. So people are, in some cases, seeing it as more of as a PC device. So then, just in thinking about, I know you guys can't see these. I will interpret these slides for you. But just in terms of the usage and how people are using tablets in general, this is from Nielsen, and they surveyed, I think, 12,000 what they called connected people. So this is business and consumer. This is just general people who are considered connected, and how they're using the devices. On the left is the tablets, and you can see that 30% are using it while they're watching TV, or 30% of their time is while watching TV. 21% of the time is lying in bed. Okay, you've got like with friends and family. And here in the bathroom is my favorite, 4%. 4% of your time is in the bathroom, so I'm sure that's all the guys, right? So 51% of the time on a device is either watching TV or lying in bed, right? So you're like, how's that at all related to work, right? It's got to be just browsing internet or searching, looking on Facebook, things like that. And then here's another, a survey from Google. This sample size wasn't quite as big, but they just looked at how people use it. This wasn't really focused on business, but playing games is a big thing. 84% playing games, 78% searching for information, 74% emailing, reading the news, things like that. So a lot of consumer type behavior. And this is sort of like my end point, like that's sort of like the closing statement now. And my personal opinion is that right now tablets are primarily personal devices, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that there was not a role in the enterprise. And a lot of this is really just because typically this kind of technology will start in the consumer world and then move into the business world. So we use them quite a bit for business. I use mine predominantly for business. But right now, if you look at the way these things are being used and just look objectively at the data, most people are considering these devices as personal devices for emailing, web surfing, watching videos. There's this whole thing about during watching the Super Bowl, the amount of people who are actually using a tablet, using an iPad or an Android device while watching TV. So you see a lot of the stuff is sort of pulling in both of those devices, both of those screens at the same time. So, however, if you then look at and sort of the sample is more about business users, business pros, and this is from IDG. the story is a little bit different. So if you just look at people who are in business, about 91% of them who have iPads use it for work first. Okay, so it depends on who you ask. If you look for people who are in the business climate, they're using it for work. And then about a quarter of those tablets have been supplied by work, showing that companies were increasingly handing out Apple's tablet as a corporate tool. Again, this was more focused on from IDG on the iPad. So our company now is starting to supply some devices, some Android and iPad devices, and you can see that this is a trend that's increasing. So there's definitely a role in it for business. So here's sort of how I went through this thing. I've got just a quick overview of the market. We talked a little bit there about the personal versus professional device, and again, my stance is that it's becoming more professional, more work related. A couple of the trends driving demand in business use, a couple of business use cases, and here I give examples of apps, but it's tough in an environment like this because part of the value of these devices is that there's really specific applications for specific uses, and whether you're in healthcare or engineering, or there's an article about how pilots are saving, airlines are saving tons of money by pilots using these things. So, there's just so many specific cases. We don't really have time to go through those, but I just, provide some examples of sort of general uses that I use and that we use in the workplace. And then a couple of common barriers to adoption. That's what I'm going to ask Chris and some other folks to chime in to see when we're talking about. So, just in thinking about where have we come from, ironically, and I didn't believe this, I actually had to do a little search to make sure this was true, but so there was actually a patent for, we think this is sort of a new thing, but there was a patent for electronic pen technology, right? Something that like use a pen to transcribe, approved in 1888, right? And my history class, I was like, was electricity invented before 1888? Oh, it was, like 11 years before that. So, and I think it was the guy, I can't remember the guy's name, whoever was sort of fighting Edison for the electricity patent, he lost and then did these other things, and one of them was this electronic tablet. So I'm like, wow, that's 1888, someone was thinking about doing this kind of thing. This idea of a pen PC, this was the pen pad developed in the 1980s, and it looks like a pretty elegant device, I know, from the clunky cube and all the cables and all that. I don't know why it didn't take off, but it didn't. And then you've got the Apple Newton. So did anybody have the Apple Newton? All right, this is you always hear stories about the giant Apple Newton flop, but this is the Apple Newton, and that was in 1998 that came out. And then there's a Microsoft tablet PC specification in the 2000s. And that really didn't really capture the market in the way that the iPad did in 2010, and now the Android devices for a lot of different reasons. And then now this is sort of where we are. This is the most recent data that I could find. These four devices or variants of these devices capture about 75% of the market share. So the iPad has about 57% at a $499 starting price point, goes all the way up to $800 or $900, I think. And then the Amazon is the Kindle Fire. That's at about 14%, starts at $199. And then Samsung, the Galaxy Tab, I believe, is that one, and that's 8% of the market, $349 price point. And then the Barnes & Noble ebook reader at 7%. So depending on what you call a tablet, these numbers could change a little bit. But just to give you a sense that it's dominated, by a few of these players, and there's other manufacturers that make these. But there are quite different. Those of you who have used multiple devices, there's differences in the functionality for sure. But now it's really it's become sort of, in terms of like your decision, it's come down to generally like an Android versus an Apple OS decision. And we're not going to talk a lot about that, but just so you guys are familiar, the Android is a free platform developed by Google, I believe, and it's so other devices and other manufacturers can license it, and they can create their own tablets, and that provides a whole bunch of flexibility, and you're going to see lots of different, probably cheaper price points, lots of different options. But you also have, as we've talked about even when developing our apps, it just means that there's so many different variants. It's just hard in some cases to manage all of it, and a lot of times the software and hardware, they're provided by different companies, and so you might not have as much as tight integration. And the opposite is sort of the Apple, which Apple owns everything, and it's proprietary. You can't build new versions of iPads, but it's very standardized, and generally it tends to be a pretty easy to use system because of all that. but it's all sort of owned by one unit. So that's really a key difference and a key decision maker when you're talking about the market. Just a couple other stats before we get into some examples. 65.2 million tablet shipments in 2011, and in the third to fourth quarter of 2011, we saw about 55% growth. So this is definitely a market that's expanding, and the U.S. accounts for about half of those tablet sales. I know demand is increasing internationally quite a bit, but this is definitely something that started in the U.S. And then this is from Morgan Stanley. They had predicted on sort of like on the bullish scenario that the market could top 100 million in 2012. So we're not quite there, but clearly this is something that we need to pay attention to. So this is sort of another one just in terms of the demand. This is from Morgan Stanley, and they do these kind of things a lot just to try to get a sense for how much demand. They do these for the iPhones, for Android tablets, for all kinds of things, all kinds of new technology to try to get a sense like, all right, of the market, are people like really, really excited about it? Are they really interested in purchasing something in the next 12 months? Or are they not at all interested? And that'll sort of gauge, gives one way of benchmarking where the market might be headed. And they said this recent survey about tablets was the most positive in terms of interest of anyone they've ever done. And that includes the iPhone, which sold 47 million units in a quarter, something like that. So you see between somewhat and extremely interested, there's 41% of people. So clearly there's going to be more devices out there as this market grows. All right, so then just a couple trends driving business demand, and I appreciate the segue you had for me, just to try to look at we're here to talk about iPads in the workplace, and so what's driving that demand for using those in the workplace. So the consumerization, so thank you very much for teeing that up for me, is an interesting concept, and I have a definition here that's long, but consumerization is a stable neologism, and if you don't know what that is, I looked that one up too. That's it's a word that hasn't been used, like adopted yet as an official word. It's sort of used in the vernacular, so I just want to include it. I thought it was a cool word. Is a stable neologism that describes a trend for new information technology to emerge first in the consumer market and then spread into business organizations, resulting in the convergence of the IT and consumer electronics industries. And I can speak to this personally. When you start using devices and technology as a consumer, you sort of expect that when you go into work. You expect the same amount of productivity, you expect the same sort of elegance with which you can do things, and productivity and all that. So a lot of it is consumers, again, sort of driving, like I don't take my consumer hat on. I don't care less about productivity or care less about elegance or ease of use or usability or any of that kind of stuff when I go to work. I don't change. I'm the same person just because I'm sort of at work. So I want to have the same tools available to me in the workplace. Another way that ties in, and for me this was an example when I started at Hershey. So I was at a startup in DC, and I was responsible there was 4 of us to start, well 2 of us to start, but so you sort of divvy up the tasks, and so one of my tasks was the IT person. So my job was to set up the network, and I was like, well great, we'll just use Google Apps, right? I'm done. so I didn't have to hire anybody, we didn't have to really do anything, so we started using Gmail, and I was like, this is pretty awesome. Like the experience of using Gmail in terms of searching, I was like, I don't have to put anything in folders anymore, I can just archive it, I can find anything I want, you send me an email, I will find it within a second because all I need to do is search for a key. So just that experience to me sort of got me so used to that. And then, not a hit on Lotus Notes, but that's what we use at Hershey. And for me, it was a far different experience. I had to start putting things in folder again, and I'd go up to people like, I lost your email. Please resend it. And they're like, really? You lost my email? Like, don't you come from like techno? I'm like, yeah, I can't find it. I can't search for it. And then I have like the IT folks coming down in the help desk, and I just feel like the moron sitting there, like, can you help me, find an email? And they're like, well, type Control F and search, and oh, okay, I found it. But so that for me has been one example of this sort of demand on and we use email a ton, so that's a pretty big deal. So secondly is the mobile workforce, and this is an interesting trend again. The consumerization driving demand for the IT and the elegance of the applications in the workplace, and then the mobile workforce. So this was a quote from someone who is a principal at ITIC, which is a research and consulting firm. What I thought was sort of well put. Interesting, the line that divides home life and corporate life has blurred considerably over the past years. And that's definitely true for me. So, when I go into work, it's, I might, we have a lot of meetings, and so generally when I go into work, it's my meeting time. And a lot of the work that I do might be outside. So yesterday I went to Panera to do some work to get out of the office for a couple hours and do lots of work from home. But it's just a different. There seems to be a trend, not just with us, but in the type of work that we do, and because of the technology and because of mobile, we can sort of. There's not necessarily the divisions as much. It's not necessarily the place. So this is on that point. A guy T.J. Kellett from Forrester Research had a couple interesting things to say. So whether at home, on the road, or from an office, work is becoming something people do, not somewhere people go. Okay, so I think that was an interesting point that I've definitely found to be true. So we'll be working from home sometimes in the evenings in the workspace. So it doesn't necessarily matter. The division between the two isn't nearly as clear cut as it was in the past. And 66% of information workers in North America and Europe already work remotely. So this is definitely going to be an increasing trend. So again, the idea that people are working remote, they're demanding more mobile solutions, is something driving the demand for these type of devices in the workplace. And in some cases, it's why it's okay to have more than one device. So you mentioned you have multiple devices. There's different uses. So if this becomes the way that we work, it sort of makes sense that we might need different devices to satisfy those needs. So just another one on this, out of the mobile productivity, 3 out of 5 workers say they don't need to be in the office anymore to be productive. Okay, so that's sort of new. So 60% of the people can be just as productive outside of the office as they can. In some cases, probably more productive because of the sort of like distraction. So we've got the mobile workforce, and third really is the rise of apps. And this is probably for me the most interesting part. But I don't know if you guys read this, but there's an article by Chris Anderson who wrote The Long Tail Theory, if you guys are familiar with that book. And he's a journalist and he's a writer for Wired magazine, called The Web is Dead. And this came out, I don't have it noted, but I think last year. But the other line says, the web is dead, long live the internet. And it talks about how our usage of the World Wide Web has changed, right? It's changed from sitting down in a browser to sort of using these devices. So over the past few years, one of the most important shifts in the digital world has been the move from the wide open web to semi-closed platforms that use the internet for transport, but not the browser for display. It's driven primarily by the rise of mobile computing. So if that doesn't make sense, the World Wide Web being using a browser to semi-closed platforms, which essentially are apps, right? So even though it's still using the same way to exchange data, it's just a different sort of use case and usage pattern. So this is a summary of all the internet traffic that you can that they track from 1990 up to 2010, and you can see back in the day you've got FTP, which is a way to upload files to servers, Telnet, DNS. This is sort of like the 90s. Then you move in here and you see like the web traffic has sort of grown and then peaked and then it actually declines. So you can see through a lot of mobile devices and such. You see proportion of video of peer-to-peer sharing networks is sort of encroaching on the web, right? So clearly there's a lot of different devices connecting to the internet, and there's different ways that those devices are connecting. So ComScore talks about the share of non-computer internet traffic for the U.S. was at 6.8% in August of 2011, and the iPad generates a third of that non-computer traffic. So people are clearly using the web differently, and there's a lot of value in if you have these applications. If you have specific business functions, a lot of times an app does a lot better. It might check information just like the browser would, but the way that it displays it and processes it, it's a really specialized function, and those have sort of really taken off. And so that's really changing the demand for not only the apps and the application development, but also for the devices that are connecting to those things. And one quote that I thought was interesting was, it's less about the searching and more about the getting. Okay, so if you have a specialized business task, you want to efficiently access that information, and you want to use some of the features, maybe the geolocation or other things that are in the devices. You just want to get it. You don't want to have to search for it. And that's more of a business sort of efficiency thing. So another sort of difference in those two mediums. So this is the number of apps per device, and so on average, this was as of July 2010 was, and I think this is apparently has probably grown, but in iOS, which is the Apple operating system, you're looking at more than 60 apps per user, per device. So a lot of those probably sit idle. You download something you think is cool, a game or something, or and then don't use it. But still, that's pretty telling in terms of the adoption of applications and how they're being used. So a couple of business use cases that I will go through, and I really just, again, it's impossible to highlight all the potential ways your businesses can, and at the end of this, I'd like to sort of ask you guys to discuss sort of applications in your industries, because there's a lot of more industry specific. But I just sort of highlighted a couple, and these are sort of just my favorites. So I'd love to hear if you guys have any other ones to add to it. But if you break them down, I mean, these are sort of my categories, so I wouldn't take these to be sort of any authority. But in terms of how we use those in the workplace, there's a whole suite of apps around personal productivity. So how do we get our workforce to be more efficient in what they're doing? Market research and analytics is another good one, where a lot of Android or a lot of tablet usage is coming about. Sales, so I'll talk a little bit about our sales team uses iPads in particular for this. There's customer support applications, like lots of communication, particularly for those of the workforce that are more mobile. And then learning and development. I mean, it's a great device for, I don't know if you're familiar with what Apple's doing with iBooks and iBooks in the education. They're trying to revolutionize the way that tablets are used in the classroom, and trying to basically make textbooks a lot less expensive and a lot easier to access. So there's lots of training and development if you think about how these devices can be used as portable training devices. So in the productivity category, this is by far my favorite, and it's funny because now at Hershey, I was like the first dork to show up with like an iPad in a meeting, like typing away, taking notes, and people are like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm taking notes, on the meeting." But now you see there's a ton of people that use this application, and it's probably my lifeline, if anything, in terms of a work application. But Evernote's an app that you can. It's almost like replaces your notebook. So you can take simple text notes, but you can do a whole lot more than that. It syncs across all your devices. So if I'm in a meeting with an iPad and I take notes, you can take snapshots, you can take audio notes. It can read PDFs. So if you load PDFs, it can scan the PDFs and know that. Organizes all that stuff, makes it really searchable and easy to find. And then whenever I do something on this device and I want to pull that up on my computer or on my iPhone, everything is there. So it's been a fantastic tool for me in terms of productivity. And again, we have a lot of people. We got this sort of approved through IT early on, and then now it's becoming a bigger and bigger deal. Lots of people are using it. So another big one, and this was they actually put a spotlight on these guys. This is Evernote. How it got great so fast. Just talking about how the Evernote phenomenon really has sort of become such an interesting trend, and they've just gotten so many people who are just really passionate about Evernote, interestingly enough. So you'll see people blogging about how they use Evernote and different use cases and things like that. So just interesting that company has sort of taken, and they haven't been around that long, has sort of gotten to the point where they're now being talked about in the media quite a bit. So another in the category of personal productivity, there's lots of these task-based applications, and so just being able to remember all the stuff that you have to do. So I like this one in particular, but I use this again. This syncs across all different devices. It's easy if you it's basically like a to-do list, but the usability is pretty amazing in terms of getting things in there. There's lots of shortcuts you can use. I'll use it because I have a lot of meetings, and a lot of people all sort of be in a meeting, be like, okay, I've got to make sure that this person knows about that, and so I can sort of type in something to talk to my boss or talk to Sue about something like that, and you can actually tag it. So next time I go to the person, I can sort of walk in and be like, all right, here's all the list of the things I need to talk to you about, because I couldn't remember it, without remembering the milk. So, but again, this is just one of many, and there's a lot of great applications out there for that. But again, thinking about in the workplace, empowering people to use these sort of productivity tools. A lot of other great ones like Dropbox is one where that's for file sharing. You can drop PDF documents, images, whatever you want, share them across devices. And obviously this has a lot of work implications too, because there are plenty of times when I go and I need a document and I don't have my computer with me, and it's nice to be able to use tools like this to access it. So another thing under the productivity tool. There's also, for those of you who are on the Microsoft environment, there are, I believe there's tools in Android. How does Android do this? Do they have apps for Word documents and Excel? I figured I don't know if they have documents to go. Same thing? Documents to go is Android too? Okay. So, for those of you who use Excel and Microsoft Word and things like that, there's ways to access these documents, make changes to it and things like that. So again, think about all the times where you might need to review a document or something like that in the workplace. You can do that stuff through your device. So again, just making it easy for those of us who are out of the office quite a bit. Then we get into sort of research and data. This is a more specific one, but this one I think is pretty interesting, especially for people who are sort of on the ground MicroStrategy and other applications offer data visualization tools and analytical tools where you can actually see the state of the business at any given moment. So you think about, for us, there's tons of managers and people who are out and about, and giving them access to real-time data on a device is really helpful. Now you think about this, looking at this on an iPhone versus looking at this on a tablet, it's a far different experience. So, and there's a lot of tools. A lot of the business application tools have iPad and Android apps as well. So in terms of market research is another good example. We use we haven't used iSurvey. We actually had a custom app developed, but we have Houlihan's and Devon are our restaurants in Hershey, and we did surveys of the patrons coming into there, and it was using an iPad. We've also done this in Hershey Park, where you sort of go around and you sort of walk up nicely to a family without freaking them out and ask them, if they'd like to participate in a survey. But again, you can sort of walk with them and, okay, you're on your way to get the food. Okay, can I, ask you a couple of questions as we do this and things like that. So I haven't used iSurvey, but just the idea, I think that's probably one of the more useful uses is in market research, particularly if you're someplace like us, like ours, which is, you're not always, the market research can't really be done from your desk. You have to sort of be out and about with the people. And of course, there's a whole industry that's cropped up around market research, and these are pretty funky-looking iPad kiosks. But I know that I think they're using these in Chocolate World. But you can use these devices, and it just replaces a kiosk. So it's you take it in, and you put it out. You can have applications. It automatically connects to Wi-Fi. So it's a pretty good way to do this kind of. This is the kind of data input that you need. A couple other examples. So sales, ERP, and CRM category. SAP Business One, again, providing consumer data, sales data on the iPad and on the device, really to give people who are looking at this data on a regular basis access to it on a tablet device. I think is pretty powerful. So again, a lot of it is about getting the information to the people when they need it, so they can make those decisions. So it's just been really interesting how many of these big companies, how many companies have really invested in custom applications. They're not really very cheap to build for these devices. So this is how, like, our sales team, just the fact that you've got this device with just this amazing graphical display and sort of high resolution photos, for the sales team. So our folks that go and talk to businesses about having events like this, and we have a group called Hershey Destination Services that talks about, well, if your group comes in, here's all the different ways that you can experience the destination for your group. We can set up, team building exercises, and we can do all kinds of cool stuff. And here's all the great properties that we have, right? Because it's you're just talking about it doesn't really do it justice. So this is a great tool for them where they're going to trade shows or otherwise, and they can just sort of scroll through or put together a slide deck for them, and they'll scroll through and show them all the different things that they can do. So, for real estate, it's pretty interesting, and any kind of sales where you're showing anything that it's more experiential. Just this, and this is a built-in app, is a pretty common use of that. So Keynote, those of you who give presentations a lot, it is actually possible, and I've done it before, to take. This is on the iPad, but there's Android equivalents as well. Is you can actually give presentations through Keynote. So if you have an adapter, you've had an AirPlay device, you can actually just take this along, not have to worry about bringing your laptop. It's a much easier, smoother experience to do that. So not only can you work on presentations and do that, but you can actually give the presentations, and we've done that as well. So just another example in the communication department, just Omnigraphal is one for brainstorming and putting together flow charts. The ability to have this in a meeting or have this wherever you are and be able to put this stuff together is pretty interesting. Some of these devices, the way they've adapted like their regular application to a mobile device and to a tablet is really interesting. So just another example of sort of a business tool that you can use. WebEx for communication. I don't know if you guys have done this, but we've sat in on WebEx meetings, and we have a shortage of meeting space sometimes because we meet so much. So the ability to have a WebEx or a video conference and just say, hey, just come into my office, or we'll just meet in the living room or whatever, set this up, and then you automatically sort of have a conference room there to look at a WebEx presentation is pretty interesting. So another use in communication. FaceTime's another great one. So when I was working out of DC, I would work from home sometimes, and then 3 days a week, and so I'd have a lot of phone calls, and we'd set up Skype or something like that. And there was always some issue with it, right? But now, with a lot of these devices, like the iPad 2 has two cameras, one in the front and one in the back, and so it's really easy to set up a FaceTime video conference, right? So if you want to do a video, which, as you guys I'm sure know, there's a lot more information that can be shared when you actually see the person, even if they're not actually there. So for me, video conference is a much better option than just on the phone if possible. And these devices have it built in, so you don't have to buy anything. If they have, in this case, an iOS device, iPhone 4 or an iPad, they can, you can do this. So our kids love to do this with their cousins, but you can also do it for business purposes. But it's funny because they'll like walk around and they'll walk like this and stuff will be shaking and it's like getting dizzy. I'm like, you got to stand still, Caroline, just stand still. So. And then there's lots of IT support things. You can access databases. Just the point is, when you think about these devices, it's much more than just sort of watching videos and things like that. The complexity of some of these applications in terms of accessing IT resources and things like that are pretty amazing. So it's just about every department and somehow can find some way. And if your IT department is mobile, so they're on site sometimes, it might not be realistic for them to sort of, all right, wait, I'll be back in the office in an hour and a half and I'll fix that for you. They can use some of these devices with them to actually make those changes. And again, the big difference between, it's a much different experience doing this on the tablet than doing it on the iPhone. So. And then there's some emerging technology. So I want to show this video. I don't know if I have time to do it. How are we time-wise? 8:55, so. Okay, all right, then I'll skip this one and sort of go. But this is all about, I haven't really heard of, maybe you guys have, of business applications for this, but it's called augmented reality, and it's really, really interesting. So it basically, you can look through, this person you can see right here is looking through an iPad screen, and they're actually seeing the scene here, but there's overlaid on this is, I think in this case, reviews of the restaurants that they're looking at. So as you scroll through, the device knows where you are, and it's overlaying sort of computer simulation on top of the real thing you're looking at, right? So there's a couple interesting, applications of this in terms of, imagine you're trying to sell a product or a property or something. You can actually show the property, and then you can sort of show what it could look like, kind of thing. There's some really interesting videos if you want to. This one's a pretty short one, but search for this kind of stuff. It's a pretty fascinating use of this technology, and I know that there's going to be really creative uses of this in the business case. I just don't know what they are yet. But so that's sort of, there's a whole category of things that are sort of in the emerging technologies that are coming. And ultimately there's an app for that, right? So as I said, I just went through a whole bunch of them quickly about just to give you some ideas of things that are already out there. But basically, if you want to do it, you can find a way to do it in an app. A couple of barriers to adoption, just to touch on briefly, is, this is the one I heard was, do you really need another device? Like, come on, we have, an iPhone, we've got laptops, and my answer is it really depends on a couple things. Personal productivity, if that's going to be a big focus of you guys, you can definitely see how having an iPad for some of your workforce, maybe not everybody, can really sort of help in that case, right? For me, it's been instrumental. It would actually make a negative impact if I wasn't able to use my iPad at work. Enhanced mobility. So if that's important to you from either a green initiative or otherwise, if you're looking to sort of to provide more mobility for your workforce, then that's definitely something you need to consider too. There's so many role-specific apps as we did. So I just think about your industry and what you're working on. Are there applications that are specific, whether it's in research or otherwise, that might be valuable for you guys? And then there's cost savings. So I know that there are a lot of companies that are actually replacing laptops with iPads. They're a little bit less expensive. And then there's some staggering numbers. I don't know if I believe all of them about the amount of money saved from paper just by people using tablets. So there can definitely be a cost savings element as well. And for us, it's really culture relevant. So my philosophy is that if you're going to be providing some sort of service to consumers who are using these devices, you need to know what it's like to use these devices, right? So in our interactive team, I want them to know what it's like to use an Android device and an iPad and all that, because then they sort of know how consumers' habits and information gathering is changing. And so just staying relevant with what the consumers are using is pretty important too for us. So it's another consideration. And this, you guys can jump in on this one. I'm not a security expert, never played one on TV either, but we can't put our company data at risk, and so security is definitely an issue. And I'm not going to say that I'm an expert in this, but just consider actual versus perceived risk. And this was put out by Apple, so take it for what it's worth. But they talk about having access control, strong passwords and passcodes and policies, things like that. So that it's not easy to get into somebody else's device. You've got device recovery, so if you want to, you can wipe the device completely. Data protection, encrypted data transmission and storage, so it's the data going back and forth. And then application isolation, which if you have two applications, they can't really very easily talk to each other, so you can't have one rogue application sort of stealing information from another one. So it's less of a risk. And I know there's lots of IT concerns, but that's definitely one of the big ones that you hear. But it's interesting that 2/3 of the companies, and this is from Morgan Stanley, expect to allow tablets on their networks within the year. So clearly this is being solved, and I think it's just because there's so much demand for it that they're realizing, like, hey, we've got to figure it out, right? We can't be the guy who puts our head in the sand and not try to figure it out. So the big question is, how does this apply to your business? So I think if you guys want to take a little bit of time, do we have time to do the questions and then come back with suggestions?
Maybe just take one or two questions so we can make sure that people leave.
Okay. Great. So rather than breaking up in groups, you guys have any thoughts, any additional comments, any ways in particular businesses that you feel like tablets would apply, or any questions? And I know and maybe you guys can comment on this and know more about that, but I know that's a concern of, my personal is a lot of this stuff it's more of a management concern than anything. If it's, whether I'm using my laptop or something else, it's a management responsibility to make sure that time is being used productively. So, yes, these can make that easier, but if you're doing that kind of stuff off, non-work stuff during work, it could happen on laptops or anything. It's more about sort of making sure that doesn't happen regardless of what they're using. But
so there are a number of applications out there that you can actually lock down the tablets. One of the biggest issues with the industry is corporate sponsored iPads versus consumer sponsored iPads, meaning you bought one, you bring it in, what do you have access to versus the company gave you one and what do you have access to. A lot of corporations want to keep that separate. If they're giving you an iPad, they want you to be able to have full access to their SharePoint, to the Exchange, to whatever different applications. But if you bring one in, they only want you to have access to Exchange. There are applications out there that can secure that down, so you only have access to the handful of things that they can choose for you. There's also ways, especially when you're in an environment through your wireless, that you can control. The wireless routers and controllers themselves can dial in and say, okay, I don't want any Facebook, I don't want any eBay, I don't want any of these sites to hit any of my consumers' PCs or any of their tablets or anything. And those are ways to control it. When you're talking 3G, 4G, it becomes a little bit more difficult to control that, but there are applications that you can control and force and push down onto their tablets to be able to manage those. It's like with our company, I can bring up my own tablet to work, but the only way I can gain any data from my company is if I have a program called AirWatch that's downloaded. It's a real quick program. It's in the App Store. It gives my company the ability to remote wipe my computer or my tablet, to remote wipe my phone. They can go in and do partial wipe where I call up and say, hey, I lost my tablet, but 2 days later I actually found it. So they don't actually go in and wipe all the pictures, they don't wipe any of the videos, but they wipe anything that's corporate data, contacts, emails, anything like that. There are a number of applications that you can purchase to secure your corporation's IT assets.
Yeah, a lot of the policies are tough because like we have I think initially Facebook was locked down for users, and then we have people who part of their job is social media. So it's hard to keep up just because it's changing so quickly with policies from an IT and an HR perspective. So it's definitely an interesting, and legislation too. So anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.